spoke of the way ahead for Nepal and India, it was a sort of homecoming, as he mentioned. In fact, since I belong to the same institute, we had our reminiscence over the years brought back all the good old days for both of us. The Honorable State Minister for Finance, Bangladesh, Mr. Shahriar Alam, spoke very eloquently on our shared history and culture. Sir, thank you for gracing this occasion. Mr. Anil Wadhwa, Secretary East, the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, I can only express my gratitude, sir, for all the support extended so graciously by the Ministry for our second IR conference, and we hope that this association and support will continue as this conference grows in stature year after year. I thank His Excellency, Mr. Kim Nok, for sending his address. I also thank all the speakers across the tracks who will be speaking over the next 2 days. I'm glad that 12 countries are represented here at this conference. Thank you also, guests from the corporate world, guests from the press, faculty, staff, and students who are present over here today. Dr. Muzumdar sir, the Chancellor of the University, you are our inspiration, and every event that we do is something that takes your vision ahead. Dr. Vidya, the person who has made this event possible, thank you, ma'am, for making this event a reality. Finally, all the teams who have worked tirelessly to make this event possible, I thank you all. It's difficult for me to mention by name each and every one, but believe me, there's been an army working out there to make this event work the way it is today. Ambassador Devre, the advisory committee, thank you one and all for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I request the audience to remain seated till the dignitaries leave the dais. Thank you.
I know.
Track 1, which is on India's trade and investments in Southeast and East Asia, will begin in about 5 minutes. So I request the audience to remain seated.
नहीं गौरी मेरे
ये क्या?
हाँ तो सारे स्टूडेंट्स बाहर निकल कर मैम कह रहे कि अनाउंसमेंट करवाओ कि सब बैठे आके अमृता अनाउंसमेंट प्रोग्राम ब्रेकअप का I don't know what Ashish is doing.
नाही नाही हा जसं ठेवलं ना तसंच त्याला केलं
ओके ओके
दोन्ही हा बुके ठेवले
इथे ग्लास लावला का
हा लावले सगळे संजय सिंह, देवेंद्र मधर, Radhakrishnan, Ajit Ranade, Shashadri. So he's on here. So you want to point and then your turn from the way. He'll reach in another 5 minutes. तो उसको कहाँ फिट करना है अभी किधर
कॉलेज माईक त्याच्यावरती लागेल
हो लागेल ना मैसेज आ रहा है because you have to fit it somewhere. Ask Anita.
Hello, 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 hello.
चेक हॅलो लगेच सांगतो वरती.
But what about the audience? Who starts to?
Can we call? She's not. They've dispersed? Yeah. Who is in charge of audience? Audience is not
Fulkar.
Who's in charge of audience?
Ashish Fulkar.
There's no audience. There is very less audience. Please let me know when we can come because they're all ready. आप बता देना they're all here, they're all ready, but the audience is not ready.
पडदा दे. आद्या शर्मा कुठे?
Hey, Tham, ask her to get them ready.
माईक चालू आहे तिथे बोलून माईक चालू आहे.
Do you know when the felicitation part is going to happen?
Not now, at the end.
And the speakers are all there. The curtains just has to be opened.
माईक चालू आहे, माईक चालू आहे.
Okay, let's go.
Speakers are here. You have to call them.
ते कुठे आहेत?
They are here.
मग ते आद्याला सांग ना.
Adya is also there.
ओके चल
ओपन केलं सांगा.
हो
कर्टन ओपन कसं सांगा.
These three people. Speaker 1, 2, 3 and 4. And after lunch, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, we are.
Start, ma'am. Speakers are there.
Okay.
Open the curtain.
कर्टन
So
ओपन
that's
कर.
what he has to do. No? I can't start without the.
Acha, you are waiting for the curtain?
हां कर
Kara.
हां ओपन.
Open.
Wait. May I please request you to settle in? We would like to start our session. May I please request you to please settle in
we would like to start session 1. After the extremely insightful could we maintain silence, please? We would like to start session 1. After the extremely insightful and interesting insights from our special guest and chief guest, we are now ready to start our first session of the International Relations Conference. The first session, as you know, will focus on India's trade and investments in Southeast and East Asia. The session will be moderated by Ambassador Sanjay Singh. Ambassador Singh was former ambassador to Iran and former Secretary East. Ambassador Singh has been very closely associated with India's Look East policy. I would just like to bring your attention to a slight change. Since track 1 is going to be particularly long, we have extremely eminent and distinguished speakers amongst us. So what we have decided to do is divide the track into 2 parts. We will start with 4 speakers who are already on the dais. And then we will break for lunch and come back, and there's going to be another session, which is a sub-session of session 1, and that will focus on Japan. So without much ado, I will invite Ambassador Singh to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Dr. Mazumdar, Dr. Vidya, Vice Chancellor Dr. Rajni Gupta, Ambassador Devre, Professor Lavale, distinguished guests, speakers, and most importantly, students. I'm delighted to participate in this International Relations Conference defining India's bridge to the Asian neighborhood at the Symbiosis International University, where dreams are translated into reality. And I congratulate Symbiosis for it. I'm very happy that issues related to India's external interactions are being discussed out of Delhi. It is particularly heartening that this afternoon sessions, or this morning and afternoon session on India's trade and investment with the Indo-Pacific is being discussed in the commercial heartland of India here in Western India, which should be of considerable relevance to the region. We have a distinguished panel, and I would request, at the end of my introductory talk, I will invite the distinguished audience to pose 3 questions which our panel can answer in the course of their presentations. As Secretary East, Mr. Wadhwa has told us, India's Look East policy is the pivot of India's efforts towards globalization, a corollary of our economic reform agenda launched in 1991. Trade with the monsoon winds was part of our connection to Asia, and the spice route was part of the value chain that we are trying to recreate once again today. We did in the commemorative celebrations with the ASEAN, sent an Indian naval vessel, a sailing ship, along with the monsoon wind, which touched each of the ASEAN countries in an 8-month visit, and said that what we did hundreds of years back, we can recreate today once again. This moment of Indian policy of look east and act east is in parallel with the shift of the global center of gravity to Asia. The growth rates in Asia average more than the rest of the world, and this is what makes the shift of gravity possible. The first impulse came from Japan, then the tiger economies of Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, and today, and thereafter by China, and today India and Indonesia and ASEAN as a whole have joined in this huge development which is going to transform our region. Australia and New Zealand complete are the bookends of this region, of which one end is India. As Secretary Wadhwa told us, ASEAN is central in India's Look East policy because it is central to the evolving economic and political architecture of the region and is the glue of building an open and inclusive architecture based on common understanding. Mr. Gadkari, when he was speaking, the Honorable Minister, talked about financial products to help promote our economic ties. And today we have with us from the Exim Bank is Chairman and Managing Director who will tell us how we can create innovative products in which can help give momentum to our economic and trade and investment ties, because relations with the ASEAN and other East Asian countries are central to the occupation of creating economic opportunities for India. The ASEAN-India together consists about 1.9 billion people, with a total economic space creating products worth over 3.7 trillion. As Secretary Wadhwa told you, we have an FTA in goods in place, and now another one in services and investment will be put into place. We have trade of around $80 billion and investment relations of over $70 billion. We also have many things of common to us. For example, we have we are all very much rice-based economies. We're afflicted by similar diseases like malaria. ASEAN and India together have the largest biodiversity in the world, and this gives us great opportunities. We have a multifaceted cooperation and a functional cooperation. We have connectivity, and we are trying to create new connectivities, but these are not just over land. It should be through air, digital, maritime, ship, but more important, people-to-people connectivity, because there is an inordinate glue between Indians and Asians, and Indians and its neighbor, and we should work on this. Minister Gadkari talked about putting new maritime services in place. What we have to do is to reintroduce what we always had. We had the shipping service along with the monsoon winds. We had a shipping service which was connecting every country along the Bay of Bengal. There is great opportunity, and coastal shipping in India is a very important necessity to create efficiencies. In the broader Asian region, we have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with a very important economic partner, Japan. We have, as you would recall, during Prime Minister's historic visit to Japan earlier this year, we have developed plans to get in great amount of Japanese cooperation, both financial and technical, to take forward India's Make in India program. We have a comprehensive SEPA in place with Korea, and Korean products are household names in India. And if you see the Indian league, any cricket league or football league, you can see Korean products which will be sponsoring that. That much is what has happened. PM has visited Australia, where he talked about putting in place soon FTA, and it has become a major source of resources for India. China is our largest trading partner, an investment partner. And we have together now partnerships in what is known as the BRICS Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. These are new financial constructs which will help develop greater synergies in Asia. We have, as Secretary East, Mr. Vadvat pointed out, other mechanisms. We have relationship with ASEAN and other Asian countries through the East Asia Summit. We also have BIMSTEC, we have the Mekong Ganga Cooperation. As our Minister of State for Foreign Affairs from Bangladesh pointed out, we have the BCIM corridors and we have the Silk Roads. And then we have the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. We also have plans for the US-promoted TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the Chinese recent proposal of the FTAAP, Free Trade Association of Asia Pacific. We have a number of areas of where we face opportunities and challenges, which is in the range of climate change, pandemics, food, water, energy, and natural disasters, which all have a bearing on economics and trade, because economics and trade is the ballast which will provide further strengthening for our relationship. We have a very distinguished panel, and as you have been informed by Professor Lavale, we'll be breaking up the sessions into two. The first session will hear addresses by Mr. Mathur, Chairman and Managing Director of Exim Bank, who is an officer of the Indian Administrative Service of 1986 batch. He's a first-class graduate in economics, an MBA in finance. He has worked in various areas, but more importantly, as an executive director with the African Development Bank, and now is with the Export-Import Bank of India, which promotes India's trade and investment with all countries around the world. We have Dr. Ajit Ranade, the chief economist with the Aditya Birla Group. He was with the Capital Convertibility Committee of the Reserve Bank of India. More importantly, he is on the board of governors of IIT Bombay. He has won the Distinguished Alumnus Award of IIT Bombay in 2009. We have my colleague, Dr. V.S. Seshadri, who's played a seminal role in India's negotiations in the erstwhile GATT and later the WTO, who was our ambassador in Myanmar and currently is vice chairman of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. And finally, in the morning session, we have Mr. K.N. Radhakrishnan, who is president and CEO of Sundaram Clayton Limited, a TVS Group company. He's an MTech in Maintenance Engineering and Management from IIT Chennai. So before I ask them to come on stage, I'll invite the audience to pose 3 questions, which maybe our panel could, during the course of the debate, take forward. We are already at 12 o'clock. We have to finish by 1, so I'll ask my panel to confine their talks to, say, around 10 minutes, so that we have some time at the end of the session for some answers, further questions. Is there any questions from the audience? Yep. Where? Please. Yeah, I think so. Okay, fine. Any other questions? If there are none, then I'd invite Mr. Mathur to come and address the audience. Thank you very much.
Namaste, good morning. I begin by, really acknowledging the leadership of Professor Majumdar and Dr. Vidya to build up this institute to this great magnificence. It's indeed my first visit to this campus, but I visited the other campus of Symbiosis, and I am delighted to know such a distinguished conference is being held today. I am very grateful for this opportunity, and in my present assignment in the Export-Import Bank of India, from that perspective and from the way we are looking at the addressing the question that the young friend asked, I don't think that this is only now that we are looking. I think we were looking east since 1990. That was a policy construct. I think the officials of the MEA know that better. They might, in their conversation, explain that part. But since 1990, the look east policy was there. But now I think the sharpening of the focus, as the Commerce Minister just 3 days ago in a similar conference where the CII had called the CLMV countries and their representatives, and she was saying very clearly that the focus is, so it's now the Act East policy. So they're looking and the acting. You're right, my friend, that there may have been some disconnect, but the connections between India and our eastern neighbors goes back thousands of years. And so culturally, we are one large formation. So culturally, and if you look at that part, we've been there. Even on commerce, like the Ambassador Singh was saying, and the other speakers mentioning, we have had very, very long-term, relations going back, commercial relations. But probably the last 30, 40 years, India's own challenges, our own development aspirations, maybe the geopolitical issues did not integrate the region, but which I think is very rapidly changing, as you will see from the figures itself. The ASEAN region, just to explain, I think you might be aware, but originally ASEAN was 6 countries, then the CLMV got in. So it became ASEAN plus CLMV, so it is now 10 members. And now another 6 are getting in, like the ambassador was saying, and we are looking at something called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So I think the future is towards integration, and so amongst those C's of culture, of commerce, the third C critically is connectivity. And connectivity is not only physical, like the Secretary East was mentioning about the roads and other physical connectivity for India's northeast to connect. So India is very well integrated. We've got long borders with these areas. And the connectivity of physical nature is also being strengthened through the digital connectivity route. So I think the thrust for the government is to enhance connectivities, commerce, and the cultural relations. So we are really looking at a huge opportunities for Asia. Like the Prime Minister said, that there is no doubt that it is Asia's century. And we in India are to now understand how is it that we fit into the global value chain so that Asia itself leverages its unique position so that the demographic dividend that we are proud of does not become a demographic disaster. So my young friends, I really implore you as the future that the real product is sitting in the chair. The real product we have, the real resource we have is you youngsters, you students. And I think what the global value chain explains to us, if you look at the disaggregated data, the global trade is about $19 trillion. But out of this $19 trillion, 28% is what is called the intermediary double counting. So actually the trade is built up because a product is partly made in raw material, is then partly worked upon, then shipped to another country. It's worked on that in that country, some parts are built, it again moves to another country. And finally, it is consumed. So the Apple iPhone, which I think many of us carry, or any smartphone, but actual economists and a Kennedy School professor a few weeks ago was sharing this in an economic conference in Delhi, that an iPhone 4, which retails for $500 in US, actually is shipped out from China at only $175. So we think that China is making all the 500. No. It is shipped out, the cost to the US buyer, the Apple company, is only $175. That means $325 is the margin that the Apple in US is earning. That $175 that shipped out, you know how much China retains out of that? Any guess? Any guess? 10%. Actually, it is $6.5. So an iPhone, which is shipped out at $175, only $6.50 retained in China. The gap, that is about 169 or whatever, 168.5, that goes to the other countries which have done the plastic, the glass, the raw material, the chips, you know. So all the individual components that actually go into an iPhone are locked out and they go to other countries. But the real chunk is made by who? By the US economy, which has the patent, the IPR, the intellectual rights. So my friends, I really implore you, when you're looking at manufacturing in India or make in India, don't get bogged down with the concept that I want to make from the scratch, that I will do the whole component. Everything does not, cannot, will not, should not be manufactured that way, because it's going to be inefficient. No matter how competitive the Indian economy attempts to be, cheaper electricity, cheaper this, cheaper land, you still can't deliver on the global value chain. So global trade and, in fact, growth veritably is on building these correlations, these cross-border. So connectivity with our neighbors is not, my friend, any choice we have. So earlier maybe there was a choice whether you want to or you don't want to. Now there is no choice. You know, there are exporters from Kerala who are actually complaining that pepper is being brought back into India from some other countries which don't grow pepper. You know, so how's that happening? That means there is something which is distorting the trade. So a lot of time and effort, I would say, and energy is going to struggle and argue and debate on the trade agreements and the barriers and the tariffs, but really forgetting what is the economics of production. And without those economics of production being discussed threadbare, like the way we opened up the iPhone, let us understand which country can make what, who is unlocking. Now, China makes a lot of money because they make millions of iPhones and they make millions of other products. And they're huge in volumes. So they've not played the margin game. They've played the volume game. Now if you want to play the volume game, we have to integrate with our neighbors. We have to integrate look east. We have to integrate with wherever there is competitive advantage. As a bank, I can say we have been financing through innovations. Secretary Singh asked me to speak on that. So the Export-Import Bank is a policy bank, and while we have commercial operations, the other big important role we play is to channelize the investments that Indian government wants Indian companies to actually make by initiating them into new countries, opening up new markets for Indian companies through the lines of credit. So the Export-Import Bank, at the behest of Government of India, extends lines of credits to other countries. We have done that with over 65 countries. And in this specific area, ASEAN and this, except for the 4 CLMV countries, we don't have lines of credit but of course we have it with Bangladesh, we have it with Nepal, and very recently we had a $1 billion line of credit to Nepal for the hydro projects. So these resources are raised by Exim Bank in dollars in the global market, and we then lend this money to these countries, but those countries use that money to import from India. So because of this facility that the Government of India is giving, the Indian companies get an opportunity to showcase their products in those countries so that in future they can build commercial relations with partners there or take investment decisions and become globally operating Indian companies. And I'm happy to say that this is giving great results. In fact, you young guys, when you want to set up your own manufacturing, don't think only of Maharashtra or don't think only of any other state. Also look at how do you build relations with another unit maybe in Cambodia. Because if you export from Cambodia into US or to Europe, you don't have to face those barriers. So it's called anything but arms the rules. So these LDC countries, if manufacturing occurs from them, similarly in Africa. So the thing is, but this is not the right time to spend too much on explaining all those. But the bottom line is there are locational advantages that Indian companies should exploit and see that they can really become global companies, create more value. The other thing I would like to share is about the fact, we have Exim Bank has an office in Myanmar and another in Singapore, and we opened this office in Myanmar really to encourage more business. I think Mr. Sheshadri ji will speak at length on Myanmar. I just wanted to tell that we had 20 operative LOCs in the CLMV regions, and with 3 LOCs were in Cambodia for $65 million for construction of electric transmission lines. And of course, this is pretty old. Many of these projects have completed. In Lao PDR, there are 4 lines of credit of $155 million. And in Myanmar, there are 9 lines of credit. We've also supported the Myanmar Foreign Trade Bank for a range of projects on railway infrastructure and manufacturing of vehicles. And new lines for Vietnam, we have recently encouraged Vietnam. $100 million line was given to Vietnam. And so this is an ongoing process. And while this effort would continue, but the real thing is how can industry to industry and how the private sector on both sides of the borders across countries, they build the relationships. So sometimes we feel that it's only government that should build the relationship. Again, to go back to your question, it's about the industry itself. You don't travel to East only for a holiday. You don't go to any of these neighbors just for a few days. You go there with your eyes and ears open, keep looking at business opportunities, and there are a large number of institutions. Exim Bank is one of them. You can approach. We have bank branches in many East Asian countries, and the Bank of India is in Cambodia and Myanmar. Then we have the Indian Overseas Bank in Vietnam. Then United Bank has got a rep office in Myanmar. So I think I'm not talking about Japan and other Asian because there is a special session, but the fact is it's a happening time. Things are moving very fast, and you young guys, when you get out into the business world, look east. But more critically, if you rightly allege that we didn't act, now's your time. Please act east. With that, I'll rest. Thank you, gentlemen. Please.
May I now invite Mr. Dr. Ajit Ranade to make his presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me join my other panelists in thanking Dr. Muzumdar and the entire Symbiosis team for inviting us. It's really a wonderful to be at this campus. Like Mr. Mathur said, this is also my first visit to this campus. I've been to Symbiosis before, and I'm very happy and really privileged to be here. The topic is trade and investments with East and Southeast Asia. But since we are going to have a Q&A session also, a substantial Q&A session, I thought I'll confine my comments to a few observations, actually. And we have a large section of students here. So with due permission of the front benches, I'll try to be a little bit classroomish. So just step back a little bit. India's development, as was said in the morning, India, China, much part of this part of the world, we consider these are ancient civilizations. But these are modern nation states, modern entities as economies. So, of course, there is a civilizational linkage between different parts of different countries. But as economies, we are young, relatively young. So one thing I want to mention is that when India began its economic development, the dominant strategy for development was import substitution. And there was some kind of an implicit export pessimism. Perhaps this came from our colonial experience. Therefore, the thrust was on import substitution. It was almost as if we wanted to do everything here inside our country. However, the Make in India that we have now, the Make in India campaign announced by Prime Minister Modi on September 25th, is not really about import substitution. It's not making everything here. I think Mr. Mathur actually outlined very nicely how, in fact, it also involves being part of a larger value chain, perhaps which crosses boundaries. So that's the first thing, that from import substitution and export pessimism, we are now increasingly open, and in fact, we are not export pessimists, but export optimists. Just to show how much that has changed, in the last, since the early 1990s, while the economy in real terms is 4 times as big, in real terms, adjusted for inflation, our exports are actually almost have grown by almost 10 or 15 times. So from being merely the trade to GDP ratio, which captures the openness of the economy, we were a closed economy. We have to admit that, because dominant philosophy was import substitution. Today, from less than 5% of GDP, our trade openness ratio is 50% of GDP. So while our economy has grown handsomely, because the average growth rate over the last 20 years is perhaps 6.5%, but the growth rate of our exports is much more. So in fact, that's a dramatic change, and that's why we are talking today about engaging with the East. Incidentally, looking East was a conscious policy, perhaps led by the MEA, but now it is embraced by not just our External Affairs Ministry, but not just as a policy of external affairs, but also commerce and trade, and of course led by the Prime Minister now. That's one thing. Secondly, look at the way our exports have changed over the last 20 years, and certainly in the last 15 years. Now, of course, for the time being, I'm going to ignore the successful stories of companies like Infosys and Wipro and so on. If you just confine yourself to the goods exported, there's been a decisive shift. The shift has been, as has been said by many speakers, from the west to east. Our major trading partners used to be Europe and North America, and today they're all in the east. This actually perhaps echoes a much older observation of the economic historian Angus Maddison, which is not in the context of trade, but he said that, in fact, he has documented that until the 1950s, the share of India and China in global GDP was almost 50%. You see, India plus China make up something like 42-45% of of the world's population, 40%, I think. So if the economic center of gravity and GDP patterns and trade patterns are shifting east, and then it's just simply, we are just going back to a historical balance. In that sense, perhaps the world is becoming more equitable, because of course, ultimately, if you have somewhat equitable distribution of trade and national incomes, you must see that share of GDP, global GDP, is somewhat proportional to the share of population. So in fact, we should be actually heartened by the fact that overall the world is becoming a little more equitable place. And we are seeing that in India's trade patterns. We are seeing that, I'll just mention one number here, that the share of America in our export basket has gone down from, this is in the last 10-15 years, from 25% to 18%. Europe has gone down from 26 to 19%. And Asia as a whole, including China, has grown from 42 to 50%. Now remember, these are percentages. The pie of export itself has grown 12 times. And in that, these shifts in percentages. So of course, one very remarkable fact is that India-China trade, India-China economic relationship is perhaps one of the fastest growing economic relationship in modern times. From nearly zero, about maybe 12, 15 years ago, we now are in the range of a $100 billion bilateral relationship. And this relationship has grown at a fantastic CAGR, compound annual growth rate. In fact, another interesting statistic, which actually is there in the Exim Bank reports, India used to be just in 2000, I think, 2001, India's rank in the countries that China exports to, so India's ranking was number 19. Today, India is ranked number 6. And so that shows the increasing importance of India as an export destination for China. The same, unfortunately, cannot be said for India's exports to China, but that is an area which hopefully we'll work on, because this trade, we cannot allow this trade to be too asymmetric or too skewed in one direction. And interestingly, by the way, so this is the point about shifting patterns of trade, patterns of GDP. Now, second point is about, however, some of the anomalies or some of the peculiar characteristics. And the Honorable Finance Minister of Nepal, Dr. Mahat, actually pointed this out. For example, in South Asia, 95% of the foreign trade done by South Asian countries is with rest of the world and not with each other. This is the only part of the world where this anomaly exists. In most part of the world, the foreign trade or trade across national boundaries is predominantly what is called, I think it's called the gravity effect, or it's predominantly within 100, 200, 300 kilometers of boundaries. For example, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA as it's called, a big part of the trade is between Canada and the US, or between Canada, USA and Mexico. Same thing is true for Mercosur countries in South America. Same thing is true actually in ASEAN. In fact, the actual trade between ASEAN countries, same thing of course is true in Europe. You know, people, until a couple of years ago, people used to wrongly think that the number one exporter in the world, the number one exporting country in the world is China. That was not true. The number one exporting country in the world measured by dollar value was actually Germany. Now, we don't think of Germany as the global exporter because much of Germany exports are actually in Europe, within Europe, or within few, 100 kilometers of its border. Of course, now it's true that Germany exports to China is also very solid. And I mean, interestingly, all the luxury cars, the Audis, Mercedes, the Porsches, have a huge and booming market in China. And so much so that the trade from Germany to China, from Frankfurt to Shenzhen, actually goes by train. This is not now, this has been 2 or 3 years ago, that there is a 13,000 kilometer train cargo which runs between Germany and China. But that just goes to, I just want to say that, so one anomaly or peculiarity is that South Asia is the only part of the world, the only region in the world where we have this very strange ratio that 95% of the foreign trade that we do, and therefore the importance of connectivity. So if there can be a train running from Frankfurt to Shenzhen, we don't have a direct train, well, let me not get into that, but so connectivity, it's not only South Asia, but I mentioned that India-China bilateral trade is one of the fastest growing and so on. You know what, from the financial capital of India, Mumbai, I don't think there is any direct flight to anywhere in China. So if you want to go from Mumbai to Shanghai, Mumbai to Beijing, Mumbai to Shenzhen, you have to go either via Delhi, but that connection may not be so nice, so you have to go via Singapore or Bangkok or Hong Kong. So connectivity. Indonesia, it's probably the 5th largest country in the world and probably the most populous country in ASEAN. And Indonesian trade with India is is growing. It's growing, it's especially, but no direct flight from Mumbai to Jakarta, I think. So this, when it's mentioned, the 3 C's, culture, commerce, culture is our ancient, shared heritage and shared culture, and connectivity. So I think the first thing, as I said, we have this shifting pattern, but we need to acknowledge these peculiarities that even simple things like connectivity or tourism, let's say, they say in economic theory that finance follows businesses. So if you set up a business, the financiers, the funders, the banks will follow. The finance follows business. But I think business follows tourism, tourists. So if the other day, as Mr. Mathur was mentioning, that this CLMV conference in Delhi, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, one of the big discussion was how many Indians go as tourists to these countries, or vice versa. And it turns out that it's very common to see Chinese people, Japanese people, even Thai, but very, very few Indians. So I think, first connectivity comes from tourists, and then business, and then the finance. So now, this is the reality. I mean, while we say look east and act east now, I think we have all these things about connectivity, about increasing trade, about becoming part of the value chain. But I just want to flag very briefly, what are the challenges from an India's perspective? Because ultimately, these relationships and this trade, and especially economic relationships, cannot be at the cost of sacrificing national interest. I mean, this is the reality of modern times. So we have gone about signing FTAs. The ASEAN FTA was signed in 2010. So we have almost 5 years of data. It turns out that systematically, India's trade deficit actually has worsened. It has gone more and more negative. So this is something we need to look at. I mean, is it that eventually Indian markets India has a large consumer market, gets harvested because of these FTAs? It's just a thought. Secondly, he mentioned the value chain concept, that the iPhone, which is a very good example, is barely 1%. So $6 out of 600 is 1%, or let's say 2%. So 2% of the value of an iPhone is captured as value added and goes as salaries or earnings or income to Chinese people. The rest of it goes somewhere outside China. Now this is okay. The 2% is okay because 2% gets multiplied by 100 million workers or something like that. So the scale. But the world, I think, is not large enough to have two Chinas. Because, China and India cannot follow the same strategy of scale-based, low labor costs, low value added, but immense scale of export. So I think that, this is kind of a contrarian thought, that we can't have a export-led strategy of growth, which was the first East Asian Tigers, the second East Asian Tigers, followed by India. So there has to be somewhat of a change. So very quickly, let me just wind up by a few more comments. So while we go about signing FTAs, I think we need to, the keyword now with the engagement with East Asia is RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The word comprehensive is very important. It's no longer only trade in goods, it's goods and services. India has 65% of its GDP in services. If we can't exploit that in international relationships, then it's not, it is actually, it is not serving, it is to our detriment, I think. And secondly, it's not only about trade, it's also about investment. So that's one thing. Secondly, India's exports, when we look at when we go and sign FTAs or embrace the East, we have to learn from our own experience, that the past shows that our exports are not sensitive to tariffs. FTAs, free trade agreements, are all about bringing tariffs down. So the expectation is that when tariff barriers go down, there'll be more trade. But that's not what happens. The actual data says that the trade is not very sensitive to tariffs. It's more sensitive to income growth. So let's not have the expectation that just by reducing tariffs we are going to. Then second last point is this whole concept of inverted duties. I know that this sounds like a commerce ministry. I wish somebody from commerce also was here. But it's true that while we have this free trade between ASEAN countries, some of the raw material has to come from non-ASEAN sources. And that comes at 5%, 2%, 3% import duties. And the finished goods will come at 0%. So you're an Indian manufacturer. So this is a typical, I'm giving an industry perspective. And you have signed an FTA. So the goods are going to come from ASEAN countries at 0 duty. You're going to be manufacturing here. So I'm not even complaining about things like the cost of infrastructure, the cost of logistics, the cost of electricity, but simply the fact that you have to import your raw material from other countries which are non-ASEAN countries at a higher import duty. So automatically, straight away, you don't have a level playing field. And you'll be surprised to know that this inverted duty, which sounds like a very technical point, affects industries like aluminum, capital goods, cement, chemicals, electronics, paper, steel, textiles, and tires. I can give you all the data. So this is something we need to, but having said that, let me just conclude by saying that, the road ahead is, of course, to find a way to be a part of this production network. I think Finance Minister Mahath said it very nicely. It's no longer about national boundaries or nations as units. It's about companies. It's about companies and breaking up the value chain in different parts of the world. And it's about production networks. It's about value chain. So we have to find a way to organize our economic relationships in such a way that we can not be, we can benefit from this engagement rather than get these disadvantages of FTAs. So this will call for some rethinking. But one fantastic example was given by Mr. Mahath himself. He said that he was saying that India-Nepal trade which was opened up in 96, which actually went down again in 2002, can simply be corrected by opening the boundaries to tourism and energy import. So this is the kind of thinking I think we should extend to the ASEAN region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ranade. May I now invite Mr. Radhakrishnan to make his presentation.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is the first time I'm visiting Symbiosis, and all the alumni from here are doing extremely well in TVS Motor. There's a small correction. I started my journey from Sundaram Clayton, but I head now TVS Motor Company, and thanks to Dr. Vidya, such a great institution, thanks to Dr. Majumdar, and sincere thanks from my side to get this opportunity. Definitely I can't talk like the eminent panel sitting there. I'll be much more practical in terms of what we have done more in the auto industry. Because I have two purposes. One, this panel. Another purpose is there is a huge target audience for us sitting here. I made a presentation for 20 minutes. Now there is a request from the chairman that we have to cut it down to 10 minutes. I'll try to go through the initial slides pretty fast because my panel members have given you fairly good background about ASEAN, Asian. Practically they have given everything. Whatever I could put together, I prepared some slides so that it really integrates some of the points which were made by the speakers here. There are a lot of similarities. If you look at this is the structure of my presentation. There are 5 areas I am going to talk about. I'll go straight away to India and ASEAN. Quite a lot of similarities. If you look at in terms of agro-climatic dependence on agriculture, in terms of the usage of rice, I think there are quite a lot of similarities. Next. This is most important. According to me, this is the most preferred destination. One of my colleagues asked me, I think every organization, every industry has got an aspiration to grow. But it is completely dependent upon the type of population we have. And ASEAN has got the youngest population. And India exactly mirrors this kind of distribution. In terms of status of growth, again, there are a lot of similarities. India is around 6.5 CAGR in terms of GDP. Most of these countries are around 5 to 7 in that band. And if you look at infrastructure, similar situation. If you look at electric power consumption, if you look at savings rate, there are a lot of similarities. I don't want to harp upon the same point what we have seen earlier from the speakers. If you look at urbanization, transportation needs, connectivity, there are no direct flights from India to Jakarta. We have a plant in Jakarta. We have to go through either Singapore. Singapore is the best hub because that is the least time. If you look at in terms of the urbanization, same proportion of all these countries. If you go and again look at the most wanted resource, which is the people, I think 2.9 billion, if I add China, out of 6 billion, 50% comes from this region, the red region, while the gray region is so vast. So practically the productivity or the intensity of the population in this region is so critical. I am going to give our experience of being in Indonesia and the neighboring countries, making motorbikes. We started our journey sometime in 2005, 2006. In automobiles, if you look at two-wheeler industry, including China, 72% of 60 million comes from this region. So 72%, and it is growing at a CAGR of 10 to 12%, which is very healthy. If you look at the premium bikes, the bikes above 500 cc, you will see many countries like Europe, US comes in. If you look at a bike used by a common man, this is the place. India, China, always there is a competition between, this is internal consumption of China, India, China, then Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, Philippines. I think all the countries are growing. And interestingly, if you look at the statistics, Japanese brands have got the major market share in this market. Practically 85-90% of the market is dominated by the Japanese, whether it is two-wheelers, cars, trucks. And this is happening over the last 5 decades. Next. Our experience when we went in 2005 as a company to get into this market, there are a lot of similarities in terms of the customers' understanding in these markets. I have one slide I try to capture it. Before that, I got an opportunity, such a great audience, so I have to talk about TVS. At least 1 minute I have to talk about TVS, otherwise I don't think I'm doing my job from the company point of view. 1980 we started, and we are in 2014. Fairly robust journey in terms of two-wheelers. We have the full range, starting from moped to motorcycles to scooters, and our joint design and development with BMW will come up with a model which is going to be really aspirational. I can't comment on the timeline, but the project is going as per plan. We started Indonesia sometime in 2006, and these are the models what we make in India, and I have a separate slide on what we make. This year we are likely to be about 2.6 million, slightly better than, we will be growing little over 30%. In terms of TVS, it is a 100-year-old brand. 1911 a company started, the group started. Today the group is about 8 billion, more than 200,000 employees directly, and very strongly a company with a lot of values in terms of trust, value, exactness, and passion for customers. I had actually added 5 minutes, Chairman, but I'm skipping because you have limited my presentation to 10 minutes. There is a small saying globally now, I can use the word globally, if anything on wheels, there will be at least one part from TVS. It could be fasteners, it could be tires, it could be brakes, it could be electricals, it could be anything, brakes. So anything on wheels, there will be at least one part from TVS. And many companies have won the Japanese Deming Quality Award, the Grand Award, and the TPM Excellence Award. Why I am highlighting, I will be correlating between these countries with 90% Japanese market share, and I want to highlight there is a huge opportunity if brand India is visible in these countries. Because one of the issues what we have seen, specifically in Indonesia, I'll share with you, those customers who have bought our products, they are extremely happy. But interestingly, they know only Japanese, they know only Chinese, they don't know India. They know Shah Rukh Khan, but they don't know India. They know Amitabh Bachchan, but they don't know India. These are the products what we have designed. These 4 products, the Neo, Rox, Tormax, and DAS, these are unique. You may not see it in India because the type of customers, they are short, they drive very fast, very narrow street. So we have to develop products which are unique to those markets. We have designed, developed these products for the market in Indonesia. We have a plant there, and these products are being sold there. And we are also exporting these products to various other countries like Myanmar and Philippines, and we are now trying to look at Cambodia, Lagos, all these markets. But this is the typical type of farm which is being used there. And of course our three-wheeler. We have just started selling our three-wheelers in Indonesia. what we have seen in terms of people, very nice people. I think, like Indians, it's very pleasant, very affiliative society. They are all, family comes the first priority, very good natured, very hardworking, highest level of learnability. Highest level of learnability. They may have certain weaknesses in terms of literacy, in terms of educational institutions, but once you teach them, I think the ability to adhere. In fact, I would rate little better than many of us in terms of possibly, because all these countries, people have been associated with the Japanese brands, and Japanese brands have done a very good job in terms of discipline, quality, fires, in fact, every hotel where we stay, I used to look at the flowers. I think it will be so fresh. And you touch the table, you can't see dust. Okay, are they indicators? They are definitely indicators of quality. They are very, very high levels of quality and very high discipline. That is what we have seen. And they are very, very humble, very humble. Why I am saying is, these are all similarities with our culture, our philosophy. In terms of why is it then we are not able to gain significant market share? Simple. While the products, customers like mileage, durability, engine quality, drive comfort, I think it comes back to brand image, brand image, brand image. Because everyone thinks that this is a good product. Would you recommend? Definitely we will recommend. This is like Japanese, but then, India, we don't know. So there is a problem. 95% of the market is not aware. I can even put 99, but I don't want to, displease ourselves that we don't know. Many of these countries, I'm not at all surprised with the statistics what my colleagues presented, that many of the other people travel, our own people don't travel. I think it is not an exaggeration, because if we don't travel, if we don't interact, how does Brand India get established in these markets? Interestingly, this is well known. The next slide, please. Next slide. This is well known. This is very well known. And I'm not a guy, first time, I don't see movies. So somebody told me, I think you should make this slide for this audience. So he has prepared and given it to me. I think, so they know India. And another interesting thing, I think there is an agency, we have co-sponsored with them. The Mahabharat serial, which is going on in India, it is going on in Indonesia. So we have sponsored it. In that we have put our products, and people are able to look at TVS now very clearly. Reality. Next. Now we are going to take our Arjunas and Bhimas to Indonesia. There is a huge connect, but how do we leverage the connect is the challenge. Next slide, please. We do quite a lot in terms of connecting with the customer, including, because Indonesia, so many, end to end, if you look at, it's such a big island, and connectivity is very, very difficult. But we make sure that every customer gets service within 24 hours. So there are product-related focus, service-related, and spare parts-related. We have completely integrated with IT, and the systems are fairly robust there in terms of, because that is required. 360 degrees brand building is required in these markets. And if I summarize, when I look at these countries, definitely I am not a marketing guy, okay? Because this is a slide which I thought that we need to start from strengthening the basics in terms of connectivity, relations, projecting ourselves what we have, build confidence, gain trust through consistency, because everything has to be delivered consistently. There is no point in on-off, which we are very good at. We start, very good initiative, then it gets stopped. That is of no use. There has to be consistency. And every touch point, we should make sure that we delight that experience. I think then India will become a preferred brand because of the three reasons. The biggest population, youngest population, practically 75 to 80% of the trade happens in this country. And I have a recommendation also, because any forum when you come, there are three areas I feel, other than Bollywood and Mahabharat, really if you have to touch people, I think educational institutions like Symbiosis has got a huge opportunity in these countries. Okay? This is not an exaggeration because we have 300 valued employees. I can tell you each one of them are equal to an Indian employee. Really good. They want to make a difference, and in certain areas they are much more refined. They are much more refined because this is a market where if somebody buys a bike, he keeps it inside his house and he sleeps outside. Because it's such a great investment in his life. Okay, he puts 4 hours or 5 hours of leave while the service is going on, he sits closer to the bike. So that is the level of connect. Okay, in terms of healthcare, I think we have more than 8.5 lakh doctors. Even I got the statistics, which is a real statistics. In India, you have a I don't want to talk about heart surgery, eye surgery, etc., etc. Simple fever and cold, $5, you get a good treatment. Even if you pay $50, you don't get a good treatment here. Okay, so we have such a educated 8.5 lakh population of doctors. Today, you know, telemetrics is not a difficult thing. We have more than 600 universities. Every year we are getting 3 million graduates. And the healthcare is so effective here, skill development is so effective here. There is a huge opportunity for the entire ASEAN group, along with we can leverage brand India. There is a huge opportunity for our country to succeed, our brand to succeed, this entire region to succeed. Thank you. I think it was a great opportunity given to me. I tried to rush up faster. Thank you so much.
Thank you for presenting in 10 minutes a fascinating picture. Thank you very much. May I now invite Dr. Seshadri to make the concluding presentation of this session.
I think that was temporarily due to sitting for long. Well, Chairman Ambassador Sanjay Singh, and distinguished co-panelists, Excellencies, my several former ambassador colleagues, scholars, students, and ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers for inviting me and for a first-timer in Pune. It's an impressive city. With a university like yours forming an important part of that impression. One cannot help feeling that if India had several universities like yours, then we will easily meet the challenges emerging in this world. The topic I will speak on will be one such challenge that the students of today, not just from India, but from various other countries also, will have to meet, arising from the looming changes on the international trading and investment framework. The changes are arising to a significant extent from the more dynamic East that we are talking about, be it Look East or Act East. And I'm talking about ASEAN, the East Asia, and the larger Asia Pacific. And we have heard earlier about the production models that have changed the landscape in this part of the world, and how there could be arguments. And here is where I believe your economics department, your law department, and international relations department have to look at the emerging trade and international framework and how it is progressing and what should be the interest of countries like India. So, what's happening is that certain key FTA, mega FTAs, next slide. These include the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP in short, presently comprising 12 of APEC members, of which 4 are from ASEAN, Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam, Japan from East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and from the other side of the Pacific, we have US, Canada, Mexico, Chile, and Peru. The second is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP in short. These are the ASEAN 10+6 dialogue partners, that is Australia, China, India, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand. Now, important to note that India is a member of these negotiations. And of course, the third, which is the proposal that is still very much on the drawing board, which is the Free Trade Area of the Asia Pacific, or FTAAP in short, which comprises 21 APEC members, since it is the APEC where it is being conceived, but its membership is still a question mark, whether it will include all of APEC, will it be more of APEC, etc. I'll come to it later. If you want next, in terms of a figurative representation of these international trade agreements, the 2 circles denote members of TPP on the right and RCEP on the left, and a rectangle that is exploring. And this envelopes possible potential members of FTAAP, the rectangle. Seven countries in the middle are in all the 3. That is Japan, Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, and New Zealand. While India is only, as of now, in one of them. I must add here, though, as I said earlier, the membership of FTAAP is still not decided. Now, this slide will indicate why we call them mega FTAs. It's because of their size and the share of world trade they cover. Any of them, when concluded, will have a substantial impact on world trading framework. The first to get concluded may be the TPP. Now, it does not have China or India, but it contributes to 38% of world GDP share and a quarter of world trade, although in terms of population, it accounts for only 11.2%. The next that may get concluded, while the scheduled date is end of 2015, but expectation is it will go much beyond. Their world GDP share is only 30% or so, although it includes in terms of population, because both China and India are in almost half of the world. And their world share combined is again just a little over a quarter. And if FTAAP, with APEC as its membership gets concluded, of course it will be far bigger. Now, several of these countries, the Asia Pacific, have also entered into bilateral or other sub-regional FTAs, and some are also under negotiations. Now, if you see this table, and this includes not only bilateral FTAs, but also trilateral or regional FTAs they are entering into, you will see that Chile and Singapore are perhaps the front runners in this exercise, and USA itself, with 14 FTAs signed, has also taken some lead. India has also signed about 11 FTAs, and 8 more are under negotiations, but these are not what I would call high standard FTAs. I will come to what I mean by that a little later. Now, complicating this picture, but a development which will also impact on the world trading framework, are 3 plurilateral negotiations which have begun. One is the Trade in Services Agreement, called TISA, in which 50 countries are participating currently. Of course, not only from Asia Pacific, but also from other countries, and this is happening outside of the World Trading Organization framework. Likewise, the proposed Information Technology Agreement 2, India incidentally is a member of ITA 1, but we are not currently looking at becoming a member of ITA 2, but 52 countries are part of this core group, and the idea is to have a broader set of products, including, let's say, smartphone, which did not exist at the time of ITA 1, to include those products now. The basic idea is to bring down tariffs on these products to zero within a short period. And then there is the Environmental Goods Agreement initiative. The negotiations began in July 2014, and 41 countries are participating in this initiative, which again, the objective is to bring down the tariff to zero or close to zero very shortly. Of course, here the objective is to bring about better environment. Now, the question arises, why the surge in mega FTAs and plurilateral agreements? There are perhaps many reasons for this. For one, it's almost 20 years since the Uruguay round was completed, and the Doha round, which began in 2001, seems stalled, although it may perhaps revive now that the Bali knot has been entangled with an agreement reached on food security and trade facilitation very recently. In the Doha round negotiations, developing countries like India have pointed to inflexible positions of developed countries, particularly on reduction of agricultural subsidies or liberalizing trade in agriculture as per the Doha mandate. In fact, the developed countries, on the other hand, are pushing for agreements in selective areas like trade facilitation, something that has already been agreed upon, or deeper liberalization in certain select sectors of particular interest to them, as I mentioned to you, the ITA 2 or services or environmental goods. Also, the earlier attempts by them to introduce investment, competition, etc., into the strategy as part of the Doha mandate, that had failed. Now, presumably, their strategy is to first agree on high standards in plurilateral or regional FTAs like TPP, and then bring these and other subjects into WTO through the back door. Now, let me then briefly sketch to you what are the key elements in the 3 mega FTAs under negotiation. As for TPP itself, it has been projected as a high standard, 21st century agreement with several chapters dealing with both, and this is important, not only border measures. If you look at WTO agreement, they largely deal with border measures, that is tariffs or non-tariff barriers, etc. But these seek to go on behind the border measures, which are largely domestic policy issues. I shall not go into too many details here, but I would like to point out 4 distinguishing features of TPP. 1, far deeper liberalization than existing FTAs. What do I mean by that? They are talking about tariff liberalization almost to the extent of 98 or 99%, if not 100%, on the entire list of products. And also deeper liberalization. What does it mean? Bringing the tariffs down almost to zero. And in the services sector, what does deeper liberalization mean? They are thinking of introducing a negative list approach. Now, what is this negative list approach? Because in WTO, we have the General Agreement on Trade in Services, which goes by the positive list approach, which means either the telecom services or the financial services or various other services. Each country indicates what are the services where it is willing to liberalize and how far. But a negative list approach will be that what are the services which you do not want to liberalize or to what extent you do not want to liberalize. This will be a significant advance over the current position. And this is one of the essential features of TPP, although I must add, TPP is being negotiated most secretively. So no one really knows what the final agreement is going to be, but from various accounts, these are the essential features. The second, and this is important, It is not only liberalization, but it also seeks to bring in certain new values. Now, what are those values? One is food safety. For example, so far, WTO, the SPS agreement, it's called Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Agreement, gave a fair amount of leeway for countries to regulate their import of agricultural products. Now, food safety, on the other hand, largely due to American leadership in this issue, they are saying that it should be based on scientific analysis. On the other hand, the EU has given precedence to precautionary principle, like GMOs. If there is a certain body of opinion in a country that GMOs should not be imported, then you give value to that opinion. But on the other hand, another body of opinion is that if scientific analysis proves that it is not harmful, then you should allow import. This is one aspect. The second, in terms of new value, is IPR. Now, TPP seeks to further strengthen the WTO agreement called TRIPS, Trade in Intellectual Property Rights, because this agreement brought about certain compromise between developed countries and developing countries, between the interests of customers, between the interests of consumers, between the interests of innovators. So it gave a certain length of time. For example, patents, you gave 20-year protection. Copyrights, you gave 50-year protection for various works. Now, this discussion is sought to be now changed somewhat towards protecting more the rights of innovator. Now, this is another value that is being sought to be introduced. It is also seeking to introduce labor and environment standards. Not that countries object to labor and environment standards, but to make them part of a trade agreement is a new concept that is emerging. The third essential feature of this agreement is that it curtails space for development. What do I mean by that? Like, for example, if you say, if you are wanting to allow investment, let's say, into India, if you insist on technology transfer, that is seen as a performance requirement which should be disciplined. So there are already, as per the WTO agreement earlier, some discipline on export performance requirement. Like you cannot say there should be local content. These are already prohibited. But TPP seeks to go beyond further in disciplining local performance requirements. There are also going to be certain disciplines in TPP on state trading enterprises, that they should be commercially neutral. Similarly, on government procurement, because government procurement many countries use as a way of assisting certain enterprises or certain sections of society. TPP is seeking to discipline them further. Finally, the fourth aspect that may be brought into TPP is the involvement of investor-state settlement dispute. The WTO, as of now, allows for only dispute between states. Of course, a state can take up a complaint of a certain industry, but it is on behalf of that industry, the state takes it up. On the other hand, TPP will bring in investor-state dispute settlement. Not that we do not have already, I must clarify this. India has entered into investment agreements in many of which investor-state dispute settlement is already there. But this is now an issue which has acquired worldwide attention, and there is a rethink. But TPP seems to be taking a decisive view by introducing this into world trade agreements. Now, what is the progress of TPP? More than 25 rounds have been held. In fact, after the 19th round, they've stopped calling it any more rounds. But every alternate month, ministerial meetings are being held, and you can say more than 80 to 90% seems ready. Expectation is it could well conclude next year. What is seen as a great question mark is the US congressional approval. Will they get it? There is also an associated trade promotion authority bill which needs to get through the Congress. The questions are, will all that happen? On the other hand, key elements of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. There are some guidelines which have been adopted by all the 16 countries. Again, this calls for a modern, high-quality, and mutually beneficial economic partnership. It will recognize ASEAN centrality, etc. I'll not go through all the details, but it's important to see what its coverage is vis-a-vis TPP. Yes, it will cover goods, it will cover services, it will cover investment, IPRs, and competition, but there are no specific reference to state trading enterprises. There are no references to government procurement, environment, or labor. On IPR, it talks about reducing IP-related barriers to trade and investment, but not on further strengthening environment. I want to make clear here, I do not want to draw any preference at this stage for TPP-like disciplines or RCEP-like disciplines, because RCEP is less intrusive. This is really for the students from all these faculties that I mentioned to debate carefully. Because earlier, there was a certain model which was indicated as the production sharing model that is emerging in the world. An iPad, how is it produced, and who gets the share of how much? You saw that the bulk of intellectual property going to the owner. Now, in TPP, what will that happen? Will it reinforce, entrench such practices? Will it further improve the role of the investor? This is something you have to debate. Again, there are very important countries who are participants in these negotiations, who have done very well in East Asia and Asia Pacific. Like ambassadors of these countries are present here. So I must be clear that we must also respect their model of development. They have been able to eradicate poverty, reduce poverty through that model. And their idea, by joining TPP, like Vietnam, like Brunei, like Singapore, like Malaysia, they have already advanced quite far in terms of their external trade, in terms of their poverty alleviation, by an export-led model which has brought about a lot of spillovers, which the economy has benefited from, which the people have benefited from. But we also have to look at what is the status of India, what are our requirements in terms of IPR, in terms of various other issues. You will need to look at these issues very carefully, because there are two models emerging. One is the TPP model, which will further strengthen and enhance some of the disciplines that WTO is already having, and they are saying these are 21st century issues. Now, from the Indian perspective, as well as from the perspective of several other developing countries, we will have to see what is the model that will suit us. And more important, if we think some other model will suit us, then time is of essence. We have to negotiate RCEP very quickly and demonstrate that an alternative model, less intrusive model, that is more workable for us, is possible. It requires not just the government to do this, because government can only provide leadership. It requires the industry, the NGOs, the pharmaceutical industry, and so many other stakeholders to sit together to see what is good in terms of possible international trading and investment framework that we should be supportive of. Otherwise, as I said, the negotiation deadlines are proceeding. And the last aspect that I would like to talk about is the key elements of FTAAP. Recently, China, in the APEC summit in Beijing, took the initiative of advancing this FTAAP, but it is not just the Chinese initiative. In fact, it has been on APEC agenda for quite a while, starting in 2006. But the APEC summit in Beijing has decided to launch a strategic study on this and to report by end of 2016. Again, it talks about comprehensive, high quality, and incorporate and address next generation trade and investment issues. This is crucial. Next generation trade and investment issues. What should they be? We need to have an internal debate. We need to not only have that internal debate, take a national consensus, and then use our diplomatic apparatus to sell that model to a wider world. Now, it also says FTAAP will be realized outside of APEC process, partly because APEC itself is a non-binding kind of a forum. Also, this would seem to imply, as I said earlier, membership not necessarily restricted to APEC or may include even all of APEC. The task force undertaking the study talks of receiving contribution from interested APEC economies. So I guess this can include India as well, depending on what the study outcomes are. But the roadmap adopted in Beijing recognizes TPP, RCEP as possible pathways to FTAAP, and that APEC will remain an incubator. Now, will the pathways meet or at least have a symbiotic existence? An interesting question, but somewhat early to answer in my view. And a great deal will depend on TPP's progress and, more importantly, RCEP's ability to come up with an alternative model. Absent such a meeting, Professor Jagdish Bhagwati has commented that TPP could prove divisive in Asia, just as has happened through various FTAs in Latin America. So my final slide, what should be India's strategy? I feel it's very important for India to remain part of global trade and investment policy trends than getting sidelined. And for this necessary, as I said, it's not just the government, but we need to have the entire stakeholder contributing to that debate. And I feel, firstly, for India, we need to engage actively in RCEP negotiations. Of course, participating actively in such negotiations would require not purely a defensive posture, that's important, but also work for certain offensive interests. And I heard the presentation by our Minister Gadkari, which was so inspiring. I do hope through various measures being taken by the government, including for the Make in India campaign, we improve our competitiveness. This is crucial. Unless we improve our competitiveness, gain certain areas where we could make concessions so that we can also get some concessions. Otherwise, our current position whereby we export around $300 billion worth of goods, we import $450 million of goods. This is not sustainable. So we have to be able to improve that export-import balance by improving our competitiveness, which becomes very essential in making use of the campaign that the government has launched. And finally, I feel becoming a member of APEC needs consideration. It will be important for us to become familiar with evolving global best practices and evolving new disciplines in diverse areas. In fact, this is a subject on which the organization in which I am a vice chairman is currently working on to see how, what are the merits, what are the possible downsides, and what we should be doing. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Seshadri, for that very illuminating talk. May I thank all the panelists here on this table. I am sure you would have all enjoyed our presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Mathur, Mr. Ranade, and Mr. Radhakrishnan. and Ambassador Sheshadri. Now we break for lunch, and we'll meet after lunch.
So before we break for lunch, may I invite Dr. Vidya to felicitate our speakers. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the extremely interesting presentations. Thank you, Dr. Vidya. I'd just like to make a quick announcement regarding lunch. Students and faculty are requested to proceed to the canteen for lunch. Guests and directors, ambassadors, invited to the convention room opposite this auditorium. I think we will come back at 2:15, or rather 2 o'clock, so that we can start the second part of this session by 2:15. Thank you.